Jo Stanford. I head up the Healthcare Project and Change Association. For anybody who's new to our events, just a tiny bit about us. If you've heard it all before, sorry for the repetition, but we are a not-for-profit community interest company, and we cover the UK as a whole. So we have regional networks in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the regions in England. We also have some really great specific interest groups that include change management, EDI, and a fantastic storytelling group. So more about that later, but do join up if you haven't already subscribed, and have a look at our events to see what's coming up soon. We've got some great events and some professional development ones with the APM coming up very soon. And tomorrow we have one with FedIP, looking at system implementations and how we can deliver those more effectively. So other than that, we have we work on supporting the profession through professional development, events, networks, training, education, and also promoting the profession with others. So we work very collaboratively with the other associations to look at how we can support all the non-clinical workforce with core skills in project and change management, but also our clinical colleagues as well. So the first bit we're going to talk about is change leadership. And I want to start by telling a story. Some of you may have heard this one before, but leading change is an incredibly important journey to go on. And this is the story of K2. K2 is the most dangerous mountain in the world. Now, statistically, until very recently, 33% of people who attempted K2 died in the attempt, consistently, 33%. So a third of everybody that attempted K2 didn't come back again. Now, you might wonder, why would people attempt it? And one of the things we talk about on the training course around change leadership is what motivates people to change. And one of the biggest challenges we often find with change is we're very much focused on getting to the top of the mountain. There's a target, there's a thing to launch, we've got a new system to implement, and a lot of it is very much focused around a specific implementation timescale, a launch date. That's the aha moment. Ta-da! You know, we've got that delivered. But the problem from a change point of view and change leadership is, if all of our focus on time, energy, resources, and money is only focused on that particular target, then often what happens is we fail to gain the benefits because we haven't put enough time and energy and resources into implementing and embedding it and getting down safely. When we talk about things like K2 as an example, we've all seen the pictures of people at the top of the mountain waving their flags, you know, celebrating, and you go, whoa, that's the big moment. What you don't see is the picture of them back down again, having completed it, exhausted and drained and perhaps a bit traumatized by it. And part of this is about the focus of change, and often organizational change is very much focused on the new org chart, the new structure. Ta-da, we've launched the new structure, this is it, now get on with it. And actually, where's the organizational memory, the networks, the connections, the governance, the organizational processes that need to go around all of this to actually make it work in practice? And so one of the things about telling a story like this is getting leaders to think about the journey, not just halfway, that the launch is not the end, the target is not just the end of the journey, getting to the top of the mountain, it's only half the journey. When I said this was a picture of K2, I was telling a little bit of a fib. This is actually a picture from the summit of K2 on the shadow of the mountain. So the shadow of the mountain is going all the way across the horizon. So what's the problem that this particular expedition team is about to face? Who's going to make a guess? Put your thoughts in the chat. What's about to happen that's going to make this journey much more difficult? It's getting dark. Thank you, Tracy. Spot on. The sun is setting They're at the top of the most dangerous mountain in the world, and they're going to be coming down in the dark. And there are some stormy clouds over there. You're right, Rebecca. And if I said, well, 33% of people die in the attempt of K2, but 90% of those people die on the way down, should that give us a different perspective for how we frame the journey? So if we're only focused on getting to the top of the mountain, the launch of the new product, the new system, the new org chart, and yet we fail to do the work and the energy and the effort to support people to implement and embed that new way of working, we're going to have a lot of failure and a lot of people getting lost along the way. And if you're one of those change leaders, your role is to ensure that everybody gets safely there and back again. So when things started to go wrong on this particular expedition, this was a picture taken by Chris Warner, who was on an expedition in 2016. 33 climbers, 18s, best of the best in the world, and yet 11 of them died in the attempt. All the same mistakes were made, and mostly human mistakes and psychological mistakes. Who should they have consulted when things started to go wrong? Who were the most experienced people on that expedition? Put your thoughts in the chat. Yes, well done, straight in there, Clement. The Sherpas, absolutely. The Sherpas are up and down that mountain every day. They are the ones that know where every crack and crevice is. They can read it, they know it, they experience it. Are they the most senior people on that expedition? No. Are they paid the most? Certainly not. Do they have the highest status? No. And yet often what we do is we defer to sort of hero leaders and hope that they have the answers for everything. But actually, the leader and the expedition leader's role is to bring the skill set of the team together to come up with the solution. And in your particular environments, you might have a Sherpa in the room who knows the ins and outs of the particular system or process or topic or service, that actually has the knowledge to be able to support things, both in terms of designing it and when things go wrong. So if you're thinking about leading change and you are a leader of change, who are the Sherpas in your change that you can bring in to help navigate safely to the destination? Because the destination is only achieved when the benefits are realized. If you don't achieve the benefits, it was all wasted effort. And we see that a lot in healthcare, that a lot of time and energy and money and effort goes into change that we don't realize the benefits of. So if you're thinking and planning change, think about the whole journey, not just the launch, implementation and embedding until it becomes the new normal and you start to achieve the benefits, and how are you going to measure and celebrate that? So how do we do that, and how do we look at what problems are from a project and a change point of view? This research from IBM UK looked at the top 10 barriers to successful business transformation. Top of that list was resistance to change. 82% said that was a barrier to successful transformation. Inadequate sponsorship, unrealistic expectations, poor project management, case for change is not compelling. Project team lacks the skills to do it. The scope expands or is uncertain. No change or comms plans. No horizontal process view. So that's looking at the wider implication of the change. What's the ripple effect? How does it impact on the wider organization? And the IT perspective is not integrated. So it's kind of done without that specialist input. So those are 10 things. Looking at your particular change at the moment, or the change that you are being subjected to, how many of those do you think still resonate today? Stick a number in the chat if you think that those are still relevant. Because these are the things that are going to need to be tackled. If you're leading change or you're subject to change, can you influence it in some way? How many people recognize those? Stick a number in the chat. This research was done in 2010, 15 years ago, and yet we're still at a point where a lot of these things are still the problems we have with change today. So we've got a couple of all 10s, and yet things haven't moved on. So what can we do collectively to support the improvement of change and engage people in change, and particularly looking at tackling those first 2 or 3: resistance to change, inadequate sponsorship, unrealistic expectations? What can we do to reduce those? And that's some of the things that we're going to look at here. So Rebecca's saying about 80%, but still, it's amazing how 15 years later, these are still the things that stop us from delivering effective change. And 5 of these relate directly to change management and engagement in change. And the top 3 particularly. So for anybody who's new to change management, what is it? So the Change Management Institute defines change as representing a domain of principles and practices that enable stakeholders of change to adopt the mindsets, behaviours, and capabilities required for that change to deliver full business value. So this is really different from, say, system, behaviours, processes. This is about mindsets, behaviours, and capabilities. And often these are the things that have less attention when we're planning new ways of working and change. So this is important to think about. And Nick Sinclair, who is Director of Operations for one of the NHS trusts, said, he's CIO, change management is 10% tech, 90% change. It's the people side of change that are going to make it work in practice or not. And this is from Julie Atkins, who's a fantastic change management expert at NHS England. And she has defined the change onion, just to think about, well, where does change fit in the overall process of delivering transformation? So we start, and often we focus on the product. That's an implementation of a new product or service, EPR systems or new technology. We've then got business change, which is the processes around change, and how do we do the operational processes around that new technology? And then the people is the change management bit. How do we change the mindset, the behaviours, the knowledge, and the capabilities to be able to implement and embed that new way of working? And all of that becomes then the adoption of these things that becomes the transformation. And I think this is a really useful way of framing the difference between business change and change management, but also the fact that you leave a layer out, everybody ends up crying. So these are the things that need to be considered, and reflect on the changes that you are leading or are being impacted by. Are these things all being considered and planned for? And many of you will be familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve, which was designed around management of grief. And one of the things when we talk about neuroscience for change is the change curve is really impactful, because change is often a grief, because part of that change is we have to let go of something that is comfortable to us. It might not be great, but if it's comfortable, it means we are often confident in it, it's familiar, it makes us feel comfortable because it's something that we engage with every day. When change happens, whether we think of it as positive change or negative change, we still have to go through a change process where we're perhaps, and a lot of people who are going through major organisational change are being impacted by this at the moment. Shock and denial, anger, people mentioned that in the Menti. Depression, disappointment, feeling, overwhelmed. All of these things are on the hard curve of change. And it takes a lot to get people safely and healthily across that change curve to a place where there is clarity, acceptance, and to a new steady state. If that planning and engagement isn't done well, then often people can get lost in that process. So part of the thing about leading change is how are you planning that change to engage people and take them safely on that journey? One of the great methods for doing this, and there's some really great change management methodologies out there. ProSci is a really good one. We're going to talk a little bit about that in there. Kotter has an 8-step model for those that like a nice structured approach to leading change. And there's some new training out that we're going to be doing a session with Kotter Inc. on so leading through uncertainty. So do keep an eye out for that coming up in the next few months. Creating the climate for change is really important. establishing a sense of urgency. Why are we changing? Why do we need to focus time and effort on it? Creating a guiding coalition. Who needs to be involved that influences the design and then engages people in the change? Developing a vision and a strategy. Having a clear destination and being clear about what the value is and what it's going to do at the end of it. And I suspect those impacted by change are going to feel that one needs a little more work right now. Once we've established that, the second phase is around engaging, enabling the organization. So this is communicating the change vision, empowering employees for broad-based action. That thing that people were feeling about feeling stuck and powerless, even if you don't have a decision around the actual outcome, if you're involved in the design and the process, that can feel like you've got a bit of control, and that's really important. And then generating short-term wins. Some of these changes can last years, and anybody who has been through reorganization recently, so I and some others on here, I suspect, were part of the merger between NHS England, NHS Digital, and Health Education England, and that dragged on for 3 years pretty much. And now it's 18 months of more change, and that can be really demoralizing. So generating short-term wins, what's the value? How do we create something new and meaningful at the end of it? And then we've got consolidating gains and producing more change. So how do we build on that in a positive way that creates some outcomes? Anchoring new approaches in the culture. And this is about reinforcing both the mindset, the ways of working, the capabilities to make sure that those are being implemented effectively. It's not, a couple of hours of training on a new system or a new approach and off you go and get on with it. How do you make it stick so it becomes the new normal? Underpinning the change management approach is what goes on in people's heads. And I really looked into this a few years ago because I was really concerned that we were following some of these methodologies, project or change methodologies, and still not delivering the changes and the outcomes. We weren't taking people with us. So I did a neuroscience course with Tabisi Vera, who's part of the Academy of Neuroscience and Education, because I wanted to understand what goes on in people's heads when they're presented with change, and why does that have such a big impact on whether the change is successful or not. And there's 3 key elements to neuroscience and change management. One is around neuroplasticity. Has everybody heard the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Is that a familiar one? So the research says, actually, you can teach an old dog new tricks. You can create new neural pathways as long as people don't have a brain disease that prevents it. But it's about motivation and engagement and what creates enough motivation for that new neural pathway to be created. There's also brain chemistry. And this is about the emotions that come from brain chemistry. And some of the things that people mentioned in the Menti questionnaire about feeling resentful or frustrated or confused or anxious, these are things that we're going to talk about because how that brain chemistry affects you is going to affect how you relate to the change and how you're going to feel about the change going forward. And then we've got brain waves, and this is about frequency and thoughts and self-awareness. And often when we're stuck in an anxiety state through change, it becomes really difficult to think constructively or creativity about change. So part of brain waves is about creating the space change to enable you to think about it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to explore these a little bit, starting with the brain waves. There are different kinds of brainwave states that impact our ability to engage with change. And if you're busy doing your day job and you've got 1,000 emails coming in and you've got, things to do and you've got a long list of things that need to happen, you're not going to be able to make the space in your mind to be able to think creatively about change or engage with it in a thoughtful or a self-assessment way. And that beta and gamma states, which is around multi-processing, when you're too busy doing, you're concentrated, you're focused, you're delivering, you're doing. That state of mind is very different from a state where you can think and be creative. So if that's the kind of environment you're creating with change, you need to create space for people to step outside of that, which is why with events like this and when you go on training, it's really important to switch your emails off and switch your notifications off, because all of that is distracting and getting you back into that doing mindset. And from a learning and engagement point of view, that doesn't help. So if you're leading change, you need to create a quiet, engaging space that's away from the day job. The alpha state, this is about creating a state of flow and creativity and focus. And this is going to be valuable if you're getting people to be involved in designing change, coming up with new ways of doing things, thinking about innovative approaches to things. And that requires that kind of state of calm and relaxation. If you think about where you have your best ideas, sometimes you'll have your best ideas when you wake up first thing in the morning because your brain's been thinking about it overnight, and suddenly you go, oh, right, I've got a solution to that thing now. I've got an idea. Or you're in the shower, because I get that. When you're in the shower, you know, you're not thinking about anything else, and suddenly your brain comes up with, right, this is how I can approach this. Going for a walk, going into nature, just observing what's around you, movement really helps with being able to get into that kind of brain state. So if you are struggling to think about something that you need to do that's creative or innovative or design based, give yourself that space, get away from the laptop, go for a walk, go and feed the ducks, or for me, the chickens, and create that bit of space and movement that allows your brain to switch into a different state. And if you're leading change or you're involved in change, you need to make sure the environment is supporting you to get into that mental state. People are not going to be able to think creatively about the future if they are too busy stuck in the doing. So, brainwaves and positive change engagements. Creating alpha and gamma waves, which are around fostering engagement and collaboration and creativity. These reduce stress and anxiety. So a lot of people are stressed in the group because they're uncertain, they've got these things going on. Creating some space to get away from that will help to reduce that stress and anxiety. Encouraging mindfulness practices. It's just about lowering that level of anxiety so that people can rest and relax, because otherwise it can be really detrimental. Facilitating collaborative and engaging sessions away from the work. Get people together, get them to be creative. Think about how people can add value and contribute to the design and development of it. Providing psychological safety is really important. And this can be a challenge because this requires you to trust that the organization has your best interests at heart and that you trust in their capability to lead that change effectively. And it's really hard if you don't have those two things to build trust and psychological safety. So it might be worth having a think about to what extent do you feel comfortable and safe in this environment around the change. Prioritizing breaks and rests. I used to work for somebody who was a mental health nurse by profession, and he was the most fantastic leader and mentor I ever had because he was so structured. He didn't work late. He went out on lunchtime and went for a walk. He was the happiest, most relaxed person I knew because he got it cracked. Working longer, working harder doesn't produce more productivity. It doesn't make it better. It just drains you and makes it worse. With a lot of change going on, if you're subject to it or you're leading it, you need to create breaks for yourself. Go for that walk that gets that mindfulness bit and also creates that separate brain waves. It'll help to relax the brain and take you to a better place to be able to cope with a lot of the change that's going on and help reduce that anxiety. In terms of the organisation's approach to change, some of you will be familiar with Amy Edmondson's work on the Fearless Organisation. This is about how you create psychological safety in your organisation. And I like this diagram because it really looks at what's the foundations for it. And you don't have to be the chief exec in order to create a safe space for people to feel a part of in terms of development. You can do it at a team level. If you're leading a team or you're part of a team, creating that team environment for psychological safety can really help everybody to flourish. So that looks at, do people feel free to speak up? Do they feel free to experiment and test things out that they can learn from that? Do you encourage collaboration across teams, across professions? Reflection, what worked well, what didn't, what can you learn from that? You know, a lot of people still say there's a bit of a blame culture that goes on, but actually, if we think about what we do as testing theories and testing assumptions, we can learn valuable things from that and we can progress. So always celebrate the attempt at something and celebrate the learning from it. So Amy Edmondson has some really great work, and I'll give you the links at the end to all the things I'm going to reference today. Psychological safety and creating organizational change, the fearless organization, but also teaming. There's a teaming one, teaming to innovate, extreme teaming. And this is all about how you as project and change professionals, as well as those leading change, can create your own team environment for your project and change, or for your team, or for your organization. So there's something in there for everybody. So thinking then about what goes on in the brain, and then moving on from the brain waves to brain chemistry. Now, people will be familiar, and this is not a technical drawing, obviously, but this is some work that has been done by, I've lost the name now. I shall find it and show you. But Visible Dynamics looks at understanding neuroscience for projects and change. And part of this is about what happens when we're presented with change and how we respond to it. If we feel like we are under attack and threatened by it, then we will have our amygdala will be triggered, and this is our fight, flight, or freeze response in the brain to something that's about change. So historically, this is the thing that saved us from the thing that was going to eat us, maul us, or attack us. And so we have that still built into us. If we feel under threat, we will respond with fight, flight, or freeze. Now, what that presents like in an organizational setting is if you fear you may be losing your job, or it's reorganization, or you're not going to know what's happening to my team and myself. The flight bit is you're straight onto NHS jobs looking for another job. Right, I'm out of here. I'm off, sort myself out, not dealing with this. And I suspect a few people have already done that, contemplating it. The fight bit is the anger, the disappointment, the fighting back against what's being done and challenging it. And that can be not necessarily good for you as an individual. It might feel satisfying that you're pushing back, but it's probably not going to change the ultimate outcome. And the freeze bit is there when people feel like they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go. And often that can mean that people feel like they are in limbo, and that they're feeling really anxious about it, but you stop functioning really because you don't know which way to go. And that means that people can go off sick, they can just be stressed, that they stop being productive, that they stop engaging, because they've actually just frozen and they just need some sense of direction. Once this has been triggered, it's really difficult to undo because you've engaged a part of the brain that is very slow to unwind. In order to avoid that, and I suspect some people are already in that state, judging by the comments, and you go, how do you get yourself out of that so that you can get into a positive brain state? The thing about a positive brain state and how you approach change in a positive way effectively bypasses the amygdala and activates the prefrontal cortex. And that prefrontal cortex is all about thinking and being constructively engaged and being innovative and creative. The amygdala does not allow you to do that. Once that's triggered, you're just lost in this fear and anxiety state. So if that's where you are at the moment, then have a think about what you can do to reduce your own sense of anxiety, moving yourself from the current place you're at, looking at a relaxing environment that can help you just de-stress, to then hopefully engage the prefrontal cortex, gets you thinking differently about how you can approach this change in a way that's positive for you. If you're leading change yourself, you need to think about how you structure change so that it engages people in a positive way. We have the same effect on us or our patients or service users, teammates, if we're putting new systems and processes in place. And this is something to think about in terms of what's a positive engagement in change and negative. From a brain chemistry point of view, when you activate that fear and fight and flight mindset, what you're generating is adrenaline and cortisol. This is the heart pounding, feeling hot and sweaty, anxious, jittery, all of those things, that sense of anxiety, that's adrenaline and cortisol running through your brain that says, quick, run away, hide, do something. But if it's not treated, it can become really negatively impactful on your health. Chronic cortisol can create inflammation and can create long-term health conditions. So trying to reduce that and trying to create a space to drop that level of adrenaline and cortisol is really important, particularly if you've got a long-term change that you're going to have to go through. Traditionally, and let's say often, we have organizational change that has a very traditional approach. Change, and if you think about the brain takes 20% of the body's energy, 20%. All the calories that you consume, 20% of them are used by the brain. When you're presented with something new and different, it requires more brain energy to learn to do something new, to engage in change and create behaviors that are different. If you don't have the capacity to do that because you're overwhelmed, you've got too much on, then it's going to create a negative energy state. You're going to be constantly drained. The other thing is when something is new that you can't relate to. And again, people said about feeling anxious and in the dark because they don't know what the destination looks like. And the problem with that increases a sense of anxiety. And also the thing is change relates to pain. It triggers the same elements in the brain that physical pain does. So when you're presented with change, it is physically painful. And this is something we're taught at a very early age to avoid. Don't stick your hand in the fire, don't stick your finger in the socket, don't kick that, thing, don't, hold broken glass. All of those things we're taught at an early age to avoid pain. So part of the thing about dealing with change is, how do you present change in a way that creates positive brain chemistry? And you can do this if you're leading change or you're part of a team. You can do this as part of your team. A brain-friendly approach reduces the energy consumption. If people need to learn to do something new, you have to reduce their daily burden so they've got capacity to use that energy for that new change. How can you reduce the workload in order to give them that space for change? Make sure that they have that capacity for change so that you've got energy. The second bit is about pattern recognition and familiarity. We are much more comfortable if somebody says, the thing that we're going to do looks just like that thing that you already know about. It's familiar. We already have a mental model for that new space, and therefore getting to there isn't as uncomfortable because you are familiar with it already. And there's times when you're presented with something, and this happens to me a couple of times, where I've been so anxious about something because I didn't understand what it was that I kind of had to go out and learn about it. A few years ago now, I remember seeing adverts, and it kept saying a slogan, and it kept advertising this thing. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what it is you are presenting to me. I don't get it. What is it? And the phrase it kept saying was, there's an app for that. Does everybody remember the adverts? There's an app for that. And it was the first iPhones. Now, I had a Nokia 3310. Anybody else have one of those? Stick your thumbs up in the chat if you had a Nokia 3310. Yeah, Brin's with me on that one. And then the iPhones came out with there's an app for that. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. It doesn't matter. What are you talking about? And I was so scared that I didn't understand what this new thing was, and I was going to get left behind, that I had to go and buy one just so I could figure out what it was. And it's that fear and anxiety about it that makes you feel anxious. If you can say, actually, it's easy, it's understandable, it's just like having your phone camera and your Word and Excel and your emails all on the same thing, but you can do it on your phone instead. You go, okay, well, that makes a bit more sense. I can kind of relate to that. It does practical things. And this is the thing you need to create with your change, is it needs to have pattern familiarity and recognition so that people can understand, right, okay, I get it. I see where you're trying to get to. I understand what that is. That makes it more comfortable to go on that change. And the hunting and laughing bit is the creation of positive brain chemistry to offset the cortisol and adrenaline. Hunting and laughing talks about creation of dopamine and endorphins and oxytocin. We get dopamine where we're presented with a challenge, and if you present people with a challenge and you engage them with that, then dopamine's created. Any gamers in the group? Anybody willing to admit that they're gamers? Stick your thumbs up if you're a gamer. So part of the thing about gaming, yeah, there's a couple of you out there. A couple of things about gaming is you get a dopamine rush when you get a reward by having completed a level, by accessing a new successful piece, that you access something, you go, right, I've got this new treasure, I've accessed that, I've got to the next level. You get a rush of dopamine. And a lot of us are really dependent on that. And if you create that as part of your plan, if you can gamify the engagement in it and learning and implementing the new ways of working, people will engage much better. So we need to balance out that sense of reward and satisfaction with a sense of belonging. Now, a lot of organizational change really negatively impacts people's sense of belonging. So with a sense of belonging, it's about, do I feel like I am valued? Do I feel part of a team? Do I feel included? Am I involved? All of those things are incredibly important for people to feel like they're part of it. And that generates oxytocin and serotonin, the feel-good chemicals. You need to balance those out when you're presenting people with change so that it's not all negative. That's going to help you create positive brain chemistry that's going to create a positive engagement in the change. So, resistance to change, 25 reasons why it won't work. I want you to have a quick read through of those and say how many of those 25 you are familiar with. Either you feel it or you're leading change and you hear that from other people. These are the real impacts of change. So how many of those do you recognize? I'm not going to read them all out, but if anybody can pick the odd one out, because this stuff came from ProSci, which is an American company. So how many of those do you recognize and which is the odd one out? That's not a bowler, but all the rest, yes. That's my bowling day. Yeah, I don't think that's one that we're all particularly familiar with, but I don't know, like crown green bowling, anybody is to that? Darts, football. But do we recognise some of these that are the things that we think and feel that help us to go, well, actually, I'm not ready for that change. These are all the things that say, we've tried it before, might well have done. Systems are different, cost too much, beyond my responsibility. Sounds okay, but is it practical? Is it going to work? Don't like the idea. All of these things are messages that we will hear from people. And how do we tackle that, both in terms of our own engagement in the change, but also if we're leading change, how do we get people engaged in that in a positive way? So ProSci came up with 10 tactics for reducing resistance to change. I think these are really helpful ones to think through from your own response to change and say, what's missing from the way the organizational change is going, or what's missing from the way you're planning the change that you are leading. Listen and understand objections, because they might well know something you don't. If it's been done before, if there's impediments that are going in there, think about the Sherpas in the room. The Sherpas in the room know exactly what the environment is like, and they're going to know where those great crevices are that you're potentially going to fall down. Focus on the what and let go of the how. It's all about why you're doing it, what the destination is, getting people to understand what the purpose is behind it, because that's really important to get people engaged. Remove barriers. And this can be time, it can be money, it can be energy, it can be resources. What can you do to make things easier for people to engage in that change, to increase their capacity to engage in the change? Provide clear and simple choices and consequences. Part of this is they might not have an ultimate say whether it's happening or not, but actually, if there are options for how to go about it, they might well recommend one that's going to work better because they have knowledge about it. And having a set of options to choose from feels like they have a sense of autonomy and a sense of belonging as part of it. And that's really going to help people feel engaged. Create hope. It's often difficult to go through change, but if you've got a clear vision about what the future is and why it adds value, you can frame it in terms of, okay, there's hope for the future, that things will get better and what that's going to look like. Create a vision for that. Show the benefits in a real and tangible way. And this can be evidence-based. And comes back to that familiarity piece, which goes, well, actually, it's already been done over there by this group. This is how it went. This was why it was successful. And these are the lessons we've learned from it. And that's how we're going to use that to help us be successful with it. So evidence of what's worked well before is often valuable. Make a personal appeal. If you're leading change and you've got a lot of teams to engage in that change, being able to make a personal appeal to people who can influence those different groups of people is really important. People will like to hear messages from their peers, their professional peers, than they do from people they don't know. Convert the strongest dissenters, and this can be a challenge. And it might be that your strongest dissenter has a really good reason for objecting, but you need to understand why, what's motivating them. So engage them in that change, understand what's generating that resistance. Is it personal? Is it professional? Is it knowledge they have that you don't? But if you can convince them that the why is really important, they can help you to generate the how. Demonstrate consequences. The burning platform bit of Kotter. Why do we have to do this? What are the consequences of not doing it that means that it's such an important thing to go ahead with? And provide incentives, but it says with caution, as this can be seen as a bribe. But things that you can potentially gamify engagement. So provide incentives for people to get involved that aren't monetary or, cake related, although cake always works for me if you want to bribe me with something. But think about what motivates people. So if you've got those tactics, understanding what motivates people is really important when you think about how you're going to engage them. Now, some of you may be familiar with David Rock's SCARF model, but these are really important for creating messages for engaging people in change or for telling the story about change. How do you connect to people who are motivated by different factors? So David Rock's model looks at people are motivated by different things. One, status, looks at the relative importance of people, and not to pick out our clinical colleagues particularly, but sometimes certain clinicians, consultant surgeons, have worked very hard to get where they are and they want to be recognised for that. I'm saying that with all facetiousness. But there is a sense that people are motivated by a sense of status because they've worked hard to get where they are and they want to be recognised for that. They need to feel like they are valued, and that can be valued for their knowledge and experience as well as their hierarchical status. So how do you ensure that they feel that they are valued as part of the process? Certainty. Some people mentioned feeling confused and anxious because actually they just don't know what's happening at the moment, and that's a really terrible place to be. So how can you create an environment that allows them to have some clarity, not necessarily about the destination if they don't know exactly what that is, but what's the roadmap you're going to follow to get to it? Because even if you don't know where you're going to get to, if you know how you're going to get there, that can create enough assurance to help people know that there's a plan in place. Autonomy. Now, this is one that is one of my particular triggers. This is about a sense of I have a choice, that I have autonomy and I have decision and I can contribute to something. So how can I provide them with a degree of input or choice that makes them feel that they are a part of that decision making? Relatedness. Now, relatedness looks at relationships and how people feel as being part of a group. A lot of people love to be part of a particular team because that particular team feels like a sense of belonging to them. If you take that away and say, oh, well, actually, we're merging these two teams from different organisations and just get on with the job, what's the matter with you? You go, yeah, but we had a sense of identity over there. We had a culture and a set of behaviours and we had a logo and a thing that created a sense of us. If you impact that can have really negative impacts about whether people have a sense of belonging. So how can you make them feel part of that new team? And fairness, and this is something that a lot of people are probably triggered by, and I think some of the comments earlier related to that. Am I being treated fairly and are others being treated fairly as part of that process? How do you build that in so that people understand that they are being included and everybody else is being included equally and fairly? If you're developing communications around your change and the leadership of change, or you're engaging people in change, how do you frame it so that you make sure that you connect with all of these different motivating factors? Because if you leave any, it will potentially alienate people who are motivated by that particular thing. So think about that in terms of your organizational change or your change that you're leading, and how can you build some of those in to make people feel valued, that there's certainty, that they have choice, and that they belong, and that they're all being treated fairly. Build that into your comms so that people feel that there's a hook for them. Just have a think about yourself, and if you're impacted by change, what does this look like for you? I'm not going to ask you to share it, but just think about what does this mean for you in terms of what motivates you, and therefore what are you looking for from the people who are leading change, or if you're leading change yourself. So just think about that in terms of what triggers you if it's not there that you're looking for, because some of that will be either a threat or a reward depending on whether it's missing or not. So the last bit around this, around the third section, is neuroplasticity. I thought this might be an easier way to describe it. So neuroplasticity is about the neural pathways in the brain, and we develop those over time. Now, we've probably all experienced this, where if you're a driver and you have a job in one particular place, you go to that every day, there and back again, there and back again, might be the school run, might be to the shops, might be something that you do on a regular basis. And as you're doing it, your mind wanders. You'll start thinking about something, you're slightly distracted, and suddenly you end up at your destination. You go, oh, not quite sure how I ended up here, don't really remember the journey, but here I am, safe and sound. And that is a very strong neural pathway. If you look at the pictures, this is a kind of three-way motorway. It's broad, it's wide, it's straight, it's well maintained, hopefully, and it's fast. So when you have a strong neural pathway in your brain, you can travel, information can travel down it really quickly. And this is why we're really comfortable with the system and the process and way of working that we already know, because we've done it so many times before. When you present somebody with a new way of working, a new system, a new process, you have to create a new neural pathway. And that's a bit like a country road or a track, because the first few times you do it, you've got to concentrate, it's rough, you're looking out for vehicles coming the other way, sheep coming out at you, there's walls, you can't see what around the corner. You have to concentrate, and that requires more effort and energy, which is why you'll often find when people are presented with change, they'll twang back to their old ways of working, because they haven't got time to focus and concentrate on how to do it in the new way. They go, I'll just do it the old way for now, because that's much easier, and then I'll fit it in later, or I'll with the best of intentions to do the new thing. But you're fighting against those really strong, fast neural pathways. If you're trying to get people to do something new and different, you have to do the repetition. You have to do it over and over and over again in order to breadthen and strengthen that track and make it faster and wider. Because you're going about 25 miles an hour down a country lane versus 70 miles an hour on a motorway. To create that new neural pathway, you have to do that repetition, which is why often when we implement new systems and processes, they don't really embed properly, and we don't always get the value because people don't stick. And they don't stick because it requires brain energy and effort, and you need to create time and space and repetition for it to happen, for that new pathway to become stronger than the old one. So one of the areas you can use to create those new pathways and to embed that way of working, if you think about the games that you play, or anything that requires practice, playing tennis or learning to drive, it's about repetition that gets you good at it. They say it takes 10,000 hours to become a proficient at something, whether it's playing the piano or learning to drive or playing tennis. The same thing applies, not necessarily 10,000 hours, but you can use gamification and game tools in a non-gaming context to engage people in developing that new neural pathway quicker. and making it more fun and enjoyable, because let's face it, nobody enjoys kind of boring ways of doing things. So there's a set of ideas here. I'm not going to look through them in detail. We'll share the slides with you afterwards so you can have a look at these and think about whether you can use them for yourself, your team, or your organizational change or your system change. Challenges and quests. Can you get people to do something to practice it? Brain building point system. Can you give people points? Everybody's got apps where they're at the gym or they've got something, and you go, if you do this several times, you get a badge. Do it 20 times, you get to the next level. Interactive scenarios and simulations. Get them to practice it in a safe place or a sandpit before doing it on the live system. Level up badges. Moving on to the next level once you've achieved this level of progression. Team-based change competitions. Have to be a little bit careful about that because you don't want to demoralize people, but if you can get people to do it as a team, it helps everybody move on. Feedback reward loops. So getting regular constructive feedback encourages continuous learning and psychological safety because you still learn from the errors. Storytelling adventures, and Brin's going to tell us all about that next, and how you can use storytelling to help you embed some of those changes. Micro learning games, quizzes, puzzles, for anybody who likes a bit of Sudoku or Wordle or crosswords, those things give you that sense of reward, that dopamine that gives you a sense of, yes, I've succeeded. Might not be a prize at the end of it, but makes you feel good. Leaderboards. Is there a competition to see who's going to win? But you don't want to demoralize people who don't have time and effort to get involved with it. Collaborative problem solving missions. Can you create, do you remember these things when we were kids? The Crystal Maze, stuff like that, where you've got to work your way through the problems to get out of it. And neuroscience informed breakout activities. So mindfulness exercises, puzzles, workshop activities. How do you change brain states to get people thinking creatively? And then change ambassador achievements. So the people who are engaging with you around change, your ambassadors for change, how do you recognize them and give them a sense of reward for participating in delivering that change effectively? Duolingo, absolutely. Yes, Clement, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what they're doing with Duolingo. Every time you hit a stage, you get a reward, you get a badge, you move up to the next level. All gamification built into that learning. Lots, great example, that one. So last minute, I'm going to rush through this because I'm a little bit behind, but in terms of delivering that change, you need a network of change. And Kotter's dual operating model in his book Accelerator is a really good example of this. We have the traditional hierarchy, and we're all a part of that in one way or another, where we have our place and our role and our team and our function. But actually what we want in terms of change is we need a network of change. And creating that network of change by connecting people across different teams and functions to be your ambassadors and allies and advocates for the change is going to be really important to get people to tell the story that you want told to the teams that they work with, or their service users or patients, so that you help to bring them on board, and also they can feed back to you around that change. Creating that change network is really important to the outcomes of the change. So what does a change network do? Provides deep and trusting relationships, enables the reach of the program to increase across the organization, drives consistency of messaging, and again, talk about the storytelling and how people can tell the story for you. Creates a sense of belonging, so people feel actively a part of it and helping themselves and their team or colleagues to be a part of the change. Impacted users absorb the change from friendly, familiar faces. This is people you know and trust. Reduces resistance to two-way engagement because they can feed the challenges and the issues back. They have Sherpas in their teams that can go, actually, this is a crevice you're about to stumble down. You might need to know about this. Promotes a collaborative approach and shared purpose. Takes everybody on the journey with you and takes them to the end, but also helps to make it stick. Provides enduring support to making it embed. So those are really important reasons for having a change network effectively leading and delivering your change locally. Developing a trusting relationship. I mentioned this earlier. In order for that change to stick, you need to have a sense that you believe that the people who are doing the change care about you and that they are competent and capable in terms of that change. If you don't have either of those two things, you've got distrust. If you believe that they are competent and capable but don't have your best interests at heart, you might have respect for them. If they are all about you and they're supportive of you, but you don't necessarily believe that they're competent and capable, you might have affection for them because they're caring but not necessarily competent. In order to develop trust, you have to believe that they care about you and that. So have a think about the change that you're involved with and where does it feel like it fits currently for you. Don't need to share that, but just have a think about that and have a think about what's missing and what you would like to see change in order to get to that trusted position. Finally, recruiting and developing a change network. I won't dwell on this, but it's a useful model to have in terms of creating that change network, defining the roles and responsibilities, creating criteria for selection, providing an overview of the leadership team management impacted by the change to get their buy-in, ask managers to volunteer change agents and volunteer themselves, recruit change champions and follow-up volunteer agents, hold a kick-off event to get people moved by the change and motivated and in practice, manage that change network throughout that change life cycle, and recognise and reward that change network. So we're going to go on to Brin's bit, but thinking about what you're going to take away in terms of that change journey. What's going to take you safely to your destination there and back again? And have a think about what actions you will take, what you'll think about, what reflections you'll do based on this, and what you will share in terms of knowledge and learning with others that would add value to the whole change. So just take a moment to have a think about that. And what I will do is I will share the reduced copy of the slides, but also the links to all the underpinning theories and models that underpin this as well, so that you can explore that further. So without further ado, if I can hand over to Brin. Understanding the change landscape and understanding the neuroscience of change is one element, but how do you engage people with change? How do you tell that story of change that makes it a compelling story? So Brin, thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise around storytelling and how those that are going through or leading change can use storytelling to help to deliver it more effectively.
Thanks so much, Joe. And if I ever broke eye contact at any point during that, it's because I was taking down notes and I've been furiously scribbling away in the background. So hi, my name is Dr. Brin Hodgskiss. My background's in psychology and I'll delve into that in a moment. But for most of my career, I've been working delivering change within the public sector, and most recently within the NHS. So I'm very much in the heart of the changes that are affecting all of you. Anyway, I know, it's a sunny day, it's a post-lunch session. This is going to be interactive. Apologies, but it's going to keep us all awake and engaged. So I love this quote from Silence of the Lambs because it perfectly defines part of why I got involved in change, because it was about problem solving and that feeling of being faced with a difficult problem, overcoming it, and that real buzz you got afterwards. And as we go through this presentation, what I'm going to lead you through is a set of exercises that gives you your own change story. So you know what Joe said on the last slide about some learning or knowledge you'd like to share? Here's where we start building a story around it. So could you take a second to just jot down a couple of keywords to remind you of a time that you solved a problem? Just a couple of keywords. Give me a thumbs up emoji or switch your camera on when it's done. Have you got those keywords? Oh, there we go. Scott, gold star for you, first over the line. Anyone else? Still thinking? Not to worry. Thanks, Rebecca. There'll be time to, as we build, some of it's going to make more sense. Tracy, Nilesh, fab. I'll move us on. So for me, well, and now I'm demonstrating one of the challenges with using the technology is when I get it wrong. Give me a moment. Wonderful. There we go. The last time I gave this presentation, it was in person, or a version was in person. And one of the feedback points was I really needed to learn how to use the clicker. So, at the feedback in the end, I'm sure that's going to come back around again. So this is about how do you use storytelling to lead you and your team through a change. And for me, the power of the story really came across to me when I spoke with serial murderers. So that was the job I started my career with. And I went round from maximum security prison to maximum security prison, working for the South African police and interviewing guys who had killed 2 or more people to find out why did they do what they had done. And one of the things that came up over and over again as I was driving around from different prisons in my second-hand Volkswagen Jetta was that the stories they told themselves about themselves were fundamental to creating the conditions that led to them committing crime, but then also meaning that when they started to commit those crimes that they continued. So it made me think a lot about the killer stories that drove their behavior, but also the same patterns, the same dark narratives that influenced them could then affect ours as everyday people going about our business. So that's what inspired me to share more of the insights from killer stories, as because it can help us avoid falling into the same trap. So the killer story I've picked to sort of start today with is something around, it's called the fog. And the fog actually came from a problem I was having in one of those interviews. So sitting opposite a serial murderer, the main thing I wanted to get to was the truth as they saw it. So look at the world, I wanted to see the world through their eyes. What were they thinking when they were doing the offense, they were committing the crimes they were committing? How did they come to be at that place? And I wanted to make sense of what they did in the context of their lives. Now, this was really difficult when I was sitting opposite this guy called Kyle. He was tough. He wasn't tough to chat to. He was friendly. He was eager to please. He wanted to talk. He started talking before I'd even put on the tape recorder. He made every effort to be friendly. He would, tell me all the things I wanted to hear. He would switch his language to suit whichever language I was using. But what was really hard was getting to any sort of truth. And for the best part of 5.5 hours, I tried. And every time we got close to something truthful or negative, he'd steer me away. So, for example, he'd go, yeah, I'm in prison for murdering 2 people, but that's just because I was framed. And I love women actually, but sometimes I'd have a disagreement, but I don't do that anymore because now I've found religion. Yes, or for example, we talk about, have you got into fights? And he'd go, I have got into so many fights all the time. I really like to fight, but that was the old me. But the new me, it was only because I was getting into fights because I was standing up to evil and standing up to gangs. Yes, I used to think this about people, but now that I found Jesus, it's only Jesus that can judge people. So I've stopped doing that. No matter the evidence I put in front of him, no matter the explanation, no matter the scenario, Kyle had an explanation. And you know what? I kind of figured, he's just trying to fool me. He's just trying to lead me astray. And you could hear that at the end of the tape. Before I stopped the tape, I muttered to myself, Elvis has left the building, because I felt I'd just been subject to a performance. But when I came back to this 20 years later, I realized I'd got it wrong, is that it's not because he's trying to fool me, it's because he's trying to fool himself. Because he doesn't have a clear story, and every time he comes close to a clear story, he muddies it. He never has to deal with the disjoint between the person he believes himself to be and the person he is actually. And I've seen the fog time and time again when we're dealing with transformation. Because we don't have a clear story about the transformation we want to deliver, we don't have to deal with the gap between what we think we're doing and what's actually happening. So beating the fog, a clear way to break and beat the fog in your transformational change is by coming up with a clear story. And simultaneously, that story, the story you're going to start shaping today, could be about you personally. Because without a narrative about yourself, it both makes personal reflection quite difficult, but it also means your influence and your impact is less. So, but why do we do stories particularly? Why are stories, the lever for a lot of change? And I would say simply, I'd answer that with a little bit of an experiment. So, has anyone seen this image before? Anyone? Any students of psychology? Joe's shaking her head. It's actually a really famous. Thanks, Chris, for in the chat. It's actually a famous psychology experiment from 1944. It was run with 111 female students from an American university. Initially, I couldn't work out why were they all women, but then I read the date. Took place in 1944. All the men were elsewhere fighting the tail end of the Second World War, and it was run by two Jewish psychologists who had fled Nazi Germany. And what they did is they showed the 111 participants an animated version of what you're seeing on the screen. So random shapes moving around a screen randomly. And they asked the participants, what do you see? And for 98% of the participants, they described one thing. 2% said what it actually was. It's just random shapes moving around a screen. It's a big square and something else moving. Everyone else told a story. And they imbued these random shapes with agency. So and relationships and characters. So they would be describing, oh, there was a big dog, ran out the house, chased a cat round the corner, then a smaller dog came and protected the cat. Or they would describe a woman meeting a boyfriend and then another man coming along and trying to pick a fight and they hide in the house. So people will, and they've repeated this experiment again and again, and they've repeated that finding again and again, that over 90% of people will always see a story. And the fact is, we will create a story even when no story exists. So as a change manager, if you're not telling a story, people are going to just pick random events and weave them together into a narrative. I was managing a change when I was working in policing, and one of the things we were looking to do was, as change likes doing, we love to centralize or decentralize, pick one. We were considering centralizing a team. I was doing a meeting with a manager to a little town at the tail end of the fens to explain to him the reason for the change. By the time I drove back to the office, the rumor had gone around the office that we were centralizing to that tiny town in the fens because they had seen it in my diary. And so people will just pick random events and weave them together in a story.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
But Clement's asked a question. Does this work with non-neurotypical people, or are they potentially the 2%?
Short answer is I don't know. But so for that experiment, it could be, Clement, because that is a non-neurotypical person saying what you see. However, I can say that non-neurotypical people will still tell stories. It is a human way of making sense of the universe, is that consequence of cause and effect. It's like a brain shortcut. And no matter how you might perceive emotions or expressions in other people, you will still utilize that the cause and effect of a narrative. So going back to the event, the time where you solved a problem, or heck, the time when you saw a Sherpa solving a problem that you want to tell other people about, you jotted down a couple of keywords, but now can you add the following things? Because what we want to do is create that sense of cause and effect. And what we also want to do is create the sense that it's a cause and effect happening in real life. So what was the situation? What was the problem you were what was the set of circumstances you were faced with? Secondly, what was the problem you had to deal with? What action did you take? And what was the end result? Again, take a couple of seconds to just jot down keywords against situation, problem, action, result. What we're doing is we're starting to build out the bones of the narrative. But I do know, and this is something that really comes across a lot to me in, my career started in psychology, but I've worked as an analyst, I've worked in change. And the common thing is they teach us the power of logic and facts. And they teach us in a lot of change management, if you present people with the facts, they're going to make the right choice, aren't they? So does anyone recognize that constellation? Pop it in the chat. I can see Joe nodding because obviously Joe's a geek after my own heart. I was a Boy Scout. You learn a bit about the stars. Close, Tracy, but it's not the plow. But it does. It kind of looks similar to the plow. Orion's belt, Rebecca, gold star. Actually, that's Rebecca's second gold star of the of the event. Yeah, it's Orion's belt. So we would see that's permanent, isn't it? Orion's belt has been seen. You look at the sky, you see Orion's belt. Those stars have been in that place for well over 2,000 years. And you go around the world and you can see the same constellation and you can say it's Orion's belt. And people around the world would say the same for the last 2,000 years. Except that's not true. We see Orion's belt, but if you were a San Bushman from South Africa, you look at those same stars, and where we see from the west, we see Orion's his belt, obviously in the middle, those three stars with another three stars of his sword hanging down. The two lower stars are his knees. Big yellow star is his upraised club or sword, and he's busy chasing maidens or bucks, depending on the version of the myth. San Bushmen see something totally different. What they see is they see a man who goes out one morning to hunt zebra. And he sees three nice fat zebra in the middle of the sky. He throws his spear at them, misses. His spear's now lying behind the zebra, but he can't go and fetch it because that big yellow star, Aldebaran, that's a lion that's watching him. So there he sits, stuck in the night sky, too afraid to go back home to his wife, who's going to tell him off for losing his spear. And that's the problem with facts. That's the first problem with facts. The facts that you see are not the facts that your change network, that your boss, that your team necessarily sees. So using Joe's, the example Joe used earlier of a change onion, you might see an onion, but someone else looking at the same facts are going to see a gherkin or a Ford Escort. So we can't rely only on facts to guide people through. Problem with facts part two, and this is, again, Joe's actually touched on this one really eloquently. So there's there was work done in the University of Southern California where they took people with strong beliefs about a certain issue, and showed them facts that contradicted what they believed. Two things they found was, one thing, they found that people responded to seeing those facts with the same neural pathways we activate to deal with pain. So a contradictory idea is painful to us. Interestingly, there was a second piece where they showed people facts around, and this was now in Harvard. They took people who strongly believed in gun ownership and people who strongly opposed gun ownership. This was in America, and they gave them facts which proved the other side's point. So if you strongly believed in gun ownership, they gave you facts saying the more guns are out there, the more violent crime. They gave people who opposed gun ownership, the more guns, the less violent crime. And what do you think? Did people change their minds? In the chat, anyone? Yep. Strong note. In fact, you got a backfire effect in some cases. So where people would actually embed their existing beliefs when faced with the facts. Am I saying it's impossible to change people's minds? To be fair to Nitesh, no. People can change, but it's against a lot of resistance. And has anyone else found, so show of hands, has anyone else found this when you're delivering a change? You've delivered some hard, cold facts, and people have gone, that's not going to work where we are. Yeah, anyone else? I like the exclamation mark from Catherine, Chris, absolutely. People will find a reason why those facts don't fit. So again, the only way to fight their story is by telling a better story. So what gives stories power? Like why do they work? One of the ways in which they work is by narrative transportation. So you are more likely to be immersed in a story if it's being told by someone that is similar to you. To Joe's point, if it's a doctor and he's hearing a story from another doctor, he's more likely to be immersed in that. And when we are immersed in a story, we and they call it transported, which I think is a lovely term, is we lose a sense of where we are. And we are now in the story that's being told. I mean, you're going to get it when you go to the movies, but you can get it just listening to someone who's telling a compelling narrative. You go like, I can picture where they are. I can picture the time. I can picture the actions they're taking. And when they're immersed, what they've found is people are more likely to change their beliefs in response to that story. So if you are immersed in the story about someone describing the change, you're more likely to believe it when you pop out the other end. And what they've also found is that story, that effect actually increases over time. So if you've been transported by the story, you are then going to be more likely to believe the thing the story is trying to tell you the longer the time goes on. Yes, and Heather, sorry, I've just seen you in the chat. That's a perfect example of around COVID vaccine. Funnily enough, another really powerful example was from, it was actually a neurosurgeon who then went on to write, a neuropsychologist went on to write a book saying, or was it how we try influence people and why it goes so wrong. And her example was around, this was pre-COVID, vaccines and the link to autism. They said, it didn't matter how many doctors said there's no scientific evidence. You couldn't ease that parent's image of their child being damaged. That was attached to the idea of an MMR vaccine, and attached very powerfully by people like Donald Trump, who would use images like, I saw somebody being injected with a a needle you use for horses, and that child is broken forever. Interestingly, they found that a doctor, that rather than trying to reassure people that vaccines were safe, when a doctor's messages was about how measles, mumps, and rubella can hurt a child, and how much more likely the child is to be damaged by a measles infection than by a vaccine going wrong, they managed to increase uptake because they were telling a better story, building on that directly fought the bad story that was being told around vaccines. So narrative transportation is what makes it powerful. So let's go back to your little story. Remember, I mentioned situation, problem, action, result. What I'm trying to do is build out those details that are going to help you transport the people you're telling the story to. So situation, what was the time? What was the place? I was working in policing. When was it? Oh, we were delivering a big change where we were centralizing. What was the problem? It involved conflict. I was trying to work out where we wanted to centralize the team to, and I went to speak to somebody on the other side. Action. What happened? Cause and effect. Well, what it caused was a lot of misunderstanding. And then what did I then have to do? I then had to, well, what I did actually was hold an all-staff meeting and implement a newsletter, and and reassure people about what the change process entailed, that yes, you would be told before stuff happened. So think about your own story for a second and think about time, place, conflict, cause and effect, and what then changed at the end. But you might want to use a little trick like this. So there I was for time and place. What did someone want? What was stopping them? And that someone could be you. Um, Cause and effect. And so that happened. And that meant. And that meant. What did people say? Again, direct speech helps increase that sense of transportation. Think about when you're gossiping in a pub or after work. Oh, you won't believe what they said on the all hands briefing. Quotes. And then change until finally this is what happened. And incidentally, if you want to refer back to it, happily take a screen grab, but we'll be sending some of this out afterwards. And then, so now that you have your story, how do you start delivering it with impact to the people you want to influence? And I won't go into depth because this could be a whole webinar just on its own, but start not by thinking. And the greatest mistake, Karen Ebb is a storytelling expert, you might have seen her on YouTube. Somebody asked her on a podcast, what's the biggest mistake storytellers make? And she said, they tell the story they want, not telling the story the audience needs to hear or that the audience wants to hear. So think about, what do you want your audience to think, feel, and do as a result of listening to your story? And the best way to discover what they want to think, feel, and do, ask them. Before you deliver your personal Sherpa story, ask them, so what do you need? What do you need from this change, boss? And then you can think, well, is it the story about Sherpas I want to tell them? Is it a story about onions? Is it a story about what I changed the problem? And then when you do tell the story, start to listen. And because what you want to be doing is creating that feedback loop where you're getting more stories from them that you can then use to refine your stories or to refine how you might wish to deliver the stories. And again, we don't have time today, but as a follow-up, thinking about how you then balance your stories with data. Because yes, stories might be more powerful than data. That doesn't mean you want to tell a story with absolutely no data at all, ever, and no relationship to any any data points. Then the next part of what gives stories power is actually picks up on a theme that Joe had around the what was it, the visible dynamics. It's neural coupling. So University of Southern California did an experiment where people who were telling their stories, their brain activity were recorded, but also the people listening to those stories were also had their brain activity recorded. And what they found was that the more the emotions of the teller of the story started to match the emotions of the listener. So and it was often describing it was a common challenge like first day of high school or your prom. So most people would have had a similar experience. They could identify with it. And when I was describing being nervous in the story, Joe, as the listener, was feeling nerves. They found even more so was that people, the listener started to predict what was coming next in the story. So before I even spoke about the disastrous moment when, I don't know, I dropped my date off a stage, Joe was anticipating what might happen next, and her emotions were then reflecting. And I love the term. They said rather than just appealing to one part of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, which is all about logic, they called it surprisingly widespread neural coupling. So what we are doing is we are linking other people's brains to ours and guiding them and guiding their sort of emotional response to what we are saying. And that can be a way to start to create your personal impact. So, and sorry, I've just realized the edge is off the screen. So, this is a story that comes from, when people ask me, why did you go interview murderers? Why did you do that? And I say, it all started over the body of a schoolgirl. So I was in a post-mortem. She had been murdered and had her throat cut ear to ear. And I was part of an investigation team. So it was an academic team that was helping the South African police profile this case and catch the guy who did it. And I remember standing over that body and getting the most overwhelming feeling of simultaneously like anger, motivation, and excitement. Just saying, we need to stop this happening, and I can do something to make sure this thing doesn't happen again. And it was that sense of motivation and that rush of emotion that led me to join the police. Led me join the police in the UK. And it's that same sense of here's a problem that I really want to solve, and I'm happy to put myself in a risky situation to do it. That has kept me motivated in my job and in my work. And that was the simplest way for me to describe my purpose and why I do the job I do. And I've used that story again to connect with why should people use stories. And it tells them something about me, but it also tells them about something what motivates me in a way that can engage. So again, your story that you've been shaping throughout today, that's one way you can use it, is a simple way to express your purpose in building your change network. So here's the final trick. I think it might be the final trick, maybe the second final, to add to your story. So you've done situation, place, action, response. You filled in time, place, direct speech. Don't forget the feels. Because humans respond to the up and down of a story. They respond to emotions. That's what causes the neural coupling. So even if your story is one that you want to underpin with hard science, mention what the emotions you were expressing in that moment. I was excited. I was scared. I was motivated. I was frustrated. all the stuff, let's be honest, which we edit out of board presentations and our PowerPoints, put that in, because that is what's going to help make that engagement with your listener, make them see you as a human, make them see you as somebody similar to them. And that's what's going to make your story particularly powerful. And then this is, and this is something to bear in the background, actually, because this speaks to a lot of the challenges of people going through the change. And I love that, Joe. And you've read my mind. It's almost, and we didn't actually plan this, but that's so true of people working in healthcare, you know. And I found it when I did this workshop with people in policing, people who I saw as their senior leader, their chief inspector, when they started to speak about why they got involved in policing, you suddenly saw them in a totally different light. And that's regardless of whether you became a mental health nurse, a commissioner. I know I listened to an NHS England director saying the reason I came to work for the NHS was because my brother had special needs, and I saw the heck he had to go through to get the care he needed, and I thought, you know what, I want to do something about that. So again, and this, what Joe's point is so important when we're dealing with people who are framing what we're doing as self-interest. And as we were preparing for this, I sort of told Joe an anecdote, and we thought, should I tell it now? And I thought I probably shouldn't, but now I'm going to do it anyway. Because very often when change happens to us in the public sector, it feels like it comes from outside. And we are put in the positions of being victims of the change. So a great example is the recent changes around NHS England. People weren't told in advance that it was going to happen. The first we heard was when the Prime Minister, we heard, we had a series of briefings. I'm saying we because I've been directly affected. There was a series of briefings happening in the space of a couple of days, and then suddenly the Prime Minister stands up in Parliament and he says some pretty upsetting things. And they were made even more upsetting by what the media then put out. So I've got a photograph of the Daily Mail headline, which was said, "At last, patients put before NHS bureaucrats." And that's so easy to take that and feel like you are being afflicted by an outside world or by a leader who does not care about you. And that's a dangerous mindset to get into, because the one thing that stood out through all the serial murderers I spoke to, there was almost a meta-narrative of, I am the victim of a cruel world. And, one of the men who, I think he was in prison for 50 murders, he explained, he said, what do you expect me to do given the life circumstances I've had? I tried my best, but if people, and he used the analogy of, if people see a dog walking by them every day and you kick that dog every day, and then one day that dog turns around and bites you, whose fault is it? He's a victim in a cruel world. And actually, I found there's research that mirrors that in people who've committed crime in the UK. And there's this victim narrative can be very powerful, and it can be very powerful for us working in the public sector. And that's where, as Rebecca's put, we need to think about how do we take that and turn it into a redemption narrative. So the difference with the redemption narrative, it's not trying to say bad stuff doesn't happen. It's saying bad stuff happens. Yes, we are sometimes treated badly, but then what did we do? How did we solve that problem? And how did we turn it around? And I've lost my screen for a second again, sorry. Let me see. Well, if I can't move the screen on, no matter, because I'll stop sharing for a second. because it doesn't matter too much. We ride in the home straight. What the features of a redemption narrative are, it becomes more about your community. So how did we solve this problem together, and focusing on how did I turn this around, like rags to riches? How did I then make it better? And what you can do to shape a redemption narrative is, just as we've been doing throughout this workshop, is thinking about a previous time you've overcome the same problem. So if I were thinking about the current change in the NHS, guys, we've done this before. Here's an example of how we dealt with it last time. So rather than me being a victim on my own, by starting to tell a redemption narrative, I'm emphasizing to the listener, this is how we as a team have dealt with this before. And we're part of a community. Rebecca, as you say, we're part of people, whether our hat badge says NHS England or anything else, we're part of a community of people who are trying to work to make this better. I'm just going to pause for a second to bring my slides up again properly. And this is definitely going to get me to the feedback of needing to master the clicker. But
I could do it if you wanted, Brin.
no,
I can
don't.
stick it up.
I think I've got there. I was just making sure I ended up on the right slide. So we were in a bad spot. We turned it around and made a real difference to the lives. So think about, when you're telling the narratives around change, how you can change that, how you can avoid that victim narrative by creating that sense of agency and creating that sense of that people are listening. What gives stories power? Part 3, telling them. This is the scary bit. And this is the bit, if I'm honest, it still gives me wet palms when I'm telling a story from sort of my life or from my work. And it's partly scary because you think, you don't know what people are going to think. You're going to worry that they're going to think you're an idiot, or they think it's self-indulgent or pink and fluffy. And it's only by telling the stories do we start to get over that fear, but also we start to be able to step more strongly into our authenticity as leaders. And the worst case scenario is, if a story doesn't land, you start to get the feedback and be able to listen, and to be able to build that out. This is also part of what Joe and I have been, what we want to do as part of the Healthcare and Project Change Association, is build those communities that can give people opportunities to practice telling your stories in a safe environment. So one story that, again, was helpful to express the purpose of change was what I call the pay-as-you-go mobile phone. And this came from my work over COVID. And to your point, Rebecca, it was a good example of trying to tell a story where I wasn't sure that people wanted to listen. And the story I wanted, well, the thing I wanted to land was, I was working over COVID, I was working in primary care, and we needed to increase the uptake of online consultations. It was really easy when we were in lockdown, because I'd had the objective to increase the uptake of online consultation across GPs. And we were currently at 20%. And I was like, I'm never going to get this. How am I going to shift that? And the answer was simple: have a global pandemic. Because as soon as we had a pandemic, within 3 weeks, we had 100% rollout across the patch I was working on. Then we had the problem of, like, so how do we stop people turning it off? And so we commissioned some work to look at the patient experience of online consultation. And then one day the researcher phoned me and she said, Brin, I've got this great story. I can't put it in the research results because it's a friend of a friend, but I thought you'd want to know. I was like, oh, okay, sounds good. She said, one of my, this friend, his only way he can access healthcare is through his pay-as-you-go mobile phone. And he was trying to get an appointment with his GP, and he burned through £60 trying to get contact with his GP for a healthcare problem. Eventually only got the help he needed when he went into a pharmacy and burst into tears. And the pharmacist said, no, wait there, this isn't right. I'm going to phone them for you. I was then trying to engage with practice managers, and I thought they're going to hate online consults because it's going to mean you're going to have to redesign your whole business process. I told the pay-as-you-go mobile phone story as a way to frame this meeting we're about to have. And what was great is the practice manager who'd I'd been told was scary, she was like, yes, Brin, and that is why we need to get you middle-class people with your Wi-Fi using online consultation and off the phones, because then this guy with his pay-as-you-go can answer the call. And it's the same story, expressing the purpose of the change, using the words of a trusted sort of person to the audience, a practice manager, as opposed to some wonk from NHS England, is then been why I've used that story again and again to justify how we might, or to explain the benefits of moving to online consults. So please pop all your questions in the chat. And that's just a cycle of how we would go about building our story, or building the story you started today. You plan, situation, problem, action, result. You layer on the feels, you tell it, you listen, and you continue on an iterative cycle. So Rebecca, one way to tell a story is you don't necessarily need to announce, I'm about to tell you a story, everyone. You sneak it in. You sneak it into the introduction. You just say, by the way, I had this weird thing happen. Again, I've seen people do it in corridors, in elevators, and it's surprisingly, it used to really frustrate me because I'm quite a geek and I like to obey the rules. It used to really frustrate me how an anecdote from a clinician said in a corridor to a manager would carry more clout than any evidence I could gather. So this is all about taking the psychological reality and the business reality and sort of merging it together in how we might want to do it. So as I said, the part of what we're doing now is developing a wider offering around how we train people in using stories. There's 7 killer stories. We covered one today and probably a bit of content from 2 or 3. But if you're interested in more of this, please do join the storytelling community, which I mentioned in my next slide. But also there's going to be HPCA training programs. I think I've got 2 dates in with nursing ambassadors from North Yorkshire. We've got 2 dates in with, I think it's Humber ICS. But if people are interested in this, join the community to practice your storytelling, sign up to training courses. If you've got a budget, or if you know a budget holder, twist their arm and tell them about what we've done around the psychology of change and storytelling. And if you want more stories that are purely just about killers, I can do that too. There's a book on Amazon which you can find, because I know when I've done this before, people have always been, some people have been very interested in the true crime element. So if you're having trouble staying, if you fall asleep too easy and want to be kept awake at night, that can take you to that dark place also. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. And what questions do you have? Just to Rebecca's point, so Rebecca's question in the chat was, how do you suggest managing change where you don't have the full story, but you need to lead your team through it? I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about trying to tell the whole end-to-end story of the whole change. But you might want to pick a story based on the stage, like if you're using Kotter's model, based on the stage of change that you are in. Or if you are using the SCARF model, based on the feeling that your team are most struggling with. So if they're struggling with status, you might want to pick a story that demonstrates that your status may not be threatened by the change we're dealing with. Or better still, pick a time when a similar change did not affect the status of the team. And funny enough, one of my directors has used that really powerfully through the current change, is to point out to the team, that the last time we all went through this change, you all thought, we were being consigned to the bottom of the ladder and nobody was listening. But when we went through that change, we got all these new roles in because people heard what you were saying and responded. So in this next change, you are now you are able to repeat that influencing act again. So that's a way I would do that without cooking my brain, trying to make get a story that makes sense of everything and all the facts.
So there's no official questions in the Q&A, but is anybody brave enough to stick their hand up and ask a question of Brin or myself? Hopefully this has been interesting and thought-provoking and something that you can take away and apply for your own particular circumstances. So if this has been interesting, useful, give us a thumbs up, because that's always helpful. Wait,
oh, there we go. Loads. Awesome. And we're going to have a feedback survey also. So like for me, because I have a fragile ego and I'm an extrovert, it would be wonderful to hear, what was good about it, but also how could we improve? What would you want us to do more in future sessions like this? And
feedback
again, if there's
forms in the chat, so please
wonderful.
do fill that in. The link's in the chat. There's also a link to the storytelling community. And for anybody who's desperately impacted by the changes going on at the moment, we have had some sessions around how to apply for jobs and also how to win at interviews. I've put the links in the chat to those as well, because there's some good stuff in there to help you with that, and the stuff around the change community. So please do have a look at that. Very briefly, in terms of next steps, if you wanted to take this further, there is a change management network. It's currently on Future NHS, and it's got links to the change management toolkit, which is fantastic. So you can click on that and link to that. We've got a link in on our website as well. But also in terms of if you personally wanted to take your knowledge and interest in this area further, we've got some fantastic training courses on this. We've got a set of essentials courses that looks at change management projects, benefits, risks and leadership, and the role of the SRO. There's also the Change Ninja course that Dr. Tammy Watchhorn does, which is a fantastic change management one. If nobody's seen her work, she's got a couple of really fantastic books called the Change Ninja Handbook, and it's an interactive adventure story, so it's good fun as well as being fascinating insights into how to plan and manage change. We've got an SRO Essentials, change management workshops, but also do a Neuroscience for Change one-day workshop if anybody's interested in that. I mentioned the Essentials series that we've got. These are coming out now, and it's taking it to the next level, good for cohorts and groups within organisations. SROs, very important to get them trained up. It's got some great stuff because leading change is very important. So we've got some fantastic resources to support them. And then organisational membership. And obviously, if organisations go through change, it's tricky, but there needs to be a future that we need to plan for. And helping the community, the across the landscape, come together and work more collaboratively around how do we create some sustainability and outcomes that are going to be beneficial to patients and service users, because ultimately that's what most of us are here for. We're here as an association to create some stability whilst organisations go through change. This is one of the reasons why we set it up, because we know that political churn goes on so frequently. There needs to be a place that's safe and friendly and open to keep you connected with your peers and counterparts whilst you're going through these potentially challenging times sometimes. So thank you for joining us today.